Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Stories That Inspire Us / the author series. My name is Janice Malillo, your host. And obviously, I have an amazing guest on today. So we're just going to dive right on into it. Let me tell you, she's pint sized, but let me tell you, she packs a punch, but in such a very good way. And she is the new author of an amazing book called DV8 from Denial. And I am so excited to welcome to the Stories podcast, the amazing Sam Perez. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you so much, Janice. I'm so excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And of course, as you know, I do also simulcast through the Wisdom Audio app, and we have a lot of listeners on right now. So thank you so much all for being here. I see some familiar names. Welcome and good morning. Now we're going to dive kind of right on into it. And Sam, it occurred to me this morning, as I'm going over my notes, and I started reading your book a few days ago. I'm not all through it, but of course, I was taking a lot of notes. And then it occurred to me, my first question was, how did the name come about? And then, I figured it out. So would you like to share that with our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book, kind of the inspiration behind it is from my parents. So they opened a restaurant in my hometown of Lexington, Kentucky, and it employs people in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. So they named that restaurant DV8 Kitchen. So it's spelled DV8. And I knew when I was writing this book, since, they were really the catalyst behind me writing it, I wanted to be able to pay some sort of homage to their restaurant in my book's title. And so I chose to do that by making it Deviate from Denial, but I actually spelled out the word. So that's a question that my parents get a lot is, why DV8? Like, what does it mean? And it literally means that their employees are deviating from their previous lifestyle and trying to get sober. So I figured maybe it would help if my book title kind of spelled it out that way.
And it really, like I said, it occurred to me this morning. I'm not going to lie, I'm raw, authentic, and real. And I'm like, wow. And then I looked at it and I was looking at my Kindle and I'm like, oh, now I get it.
Janice, you're not alone. A lot of people don't make that connection either. So they're right there with you.
And I just want to back up a tad. Obviously, you are a news journalist, and so you love telling stories.
Yes. Absolutely. So yeah, I've always loved telling stories, and I knew I wanted to kind of pursue this path ever since I was in 7th grade. So that's kind of when I figured it out. And I recognized kind of the work that my parents were doing. And through that, it was a family affair when they opened the restaurant, as is, I think, most family businesses. So I really got to work alongside them since they opened it when I was in high school. And I met some amazing people who really had awesome stories. And because, that's what I love doing, is sharing those stories. I saw so much potential in all of the people that I met, all of the people that I talked to, and just listening to them share their lives and their experiences. I figured, I want to share this, and maybe it could do some good.
And it certainly did, because as I said, when I started reading your book, I was first amazed at, number one, how you set the book up. Absolutely phenomenal in parts and sections, and of course, the chapters. But these stories are so relatable, because one of your chapters, actually the first chapter in part 2, addiction doesn't discriminate.
Yeah. And that's a huge theme that comes throughout my book. And that's, I think, kind of one of the biggest misconceptions, or the biggest, I think, problems with the way that we tend to view addiction. And so my book is just an attempt to start the conversation and try and challenge, the way that we think about it. And I think we're so quick to kind of group people that are struggling with addiction in this them category. Oh, those addicts, those junkies over there. And that's not the case. It's us, because addiction doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter your race, your gender, your age, your socioeconomic status, nothing. I mean, it affects everyone. No one is immune. So yeah, it doesn't discriminate at all. And I think it's really important that we notice that.
And I'm so glad that you said that, because the backdrop, when your first chapter, you really dove into how we got there. And I think in many respects, when we have that generalization type of conversation, we do tend to categorize certain things which we shouldn't be doing. And I'm sure we've all done it to a certain extent. But you really talk about the history. And I think it's so important to point that out, because we just didn't all of a sudden have this problem. Like, obviously, this is a huge problem today. What would you say was a big takeaway for you when you wrote that first chapter? Because I see a lot of depth, I see a lot of history in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were so many takeaways, but I think what's really crazy is just looking at how little we knew when it came to prescribing opioids. And that really is the crux of kind of why we're here today. Now, there are other factors that played into it. I kind of in my book talk about the perception of pain and how we have treated that differently over time, and how doctors have treated that differently. And just our perceptions around that, and wanting to treat pain, and really making that kind of a key factor in treatment. But also, I just think we didn't know. And so, and even still, we have the overprescription of medicine, and patients who, are having this medicine prescribed from doctors, and they just don't understand the risks. And, it's heartbreaking to know that is how so many people got started. And, I think we just didn't know. We just had no idea what we were doing, and the kind of that we were playing with fire, but we were. And it seems like now, we have this huge problem on our hands. And I really, really think it's important for all of us to start understanding it, to start having the hard conversations, because if we don't fix this, it's going to keep getting worse.
And that is so true. And it took me back to a time, because my mom's side of the family, there's some alcoholism, of course. And obviously that's a very real addiction. So I'm very mindful of that, when the doctor prescribes something, for instance, when I had my hip operation, I think I maybe only took it for 2 days, and then I just took basic Tylenol, and I'm always aware that is in my family's history. That doesn't mean I'm very cognizant, is what I'm trying to say, of that.
Yeah.
I try not to take anything, and that's not what I would suggest for anyone. But for me, for anybody, I think that does have those addictions in their family, I think a lot of us are very aware of that, maybe very hypersensitive to that as well.
Yeah. And I think that's a good thing, because I think it's interesting. I think a lot of people tend to look at addiction as a choice, but I would argue that no one wakes up and says, oh, I want to be addicted to heroin today. Like, no one makes that choice. And so it's a slippery slope. And that's what I think a lot of people maybe don't realize is, you might start with your hip operation, kind of taking one pill a day as prescribed. And then before you know it, you're sneaking a pill here or there. You think it's no big deal. And I mean, that's a slippery slope. And that's the story for a lot of people. And what I think is it doesn't matter how you fell into addiction. It's a problem regardless, and it should be treated with empathy, regardless of how you got started. But for a lot of people, it was, a wisdom tooth surgery, or, something like that, where they literally just had no idea what was happening until it was too late.
Right. And I think that's I want to say the innocent part of that, having your wisdom tooth out. Well, I mean, how many stories have you maybe heard? But how many stories are yet to be told that situation exactly happened to that person? We don't, I think of addiction as, oh, well, so-and-so got their wisdom tooth out and now they're addicted to painkillers. It unfortunately happens.
Absolutely. It happens all the time. And it takes a while, I think, for people to realize, because it doesn't just escalate all of a sudden one day. But that is what happens, is it does escalate. You start taking more and more pills, and they start getting more expensive. And so then you turn to cheaper alternatives. And that doesn't happen for everyone. Some people realize they, have a problem and are able to stop taking it. Some people are able to manage that, but others aren't. And yeah, I mean, it's a huge problem. And I think that people don't always think of it, like you said, like that. And they tend to view it as a choice. And there are people that also struggle with substance use disorder who maybe were in different circumstances where they grew up in a household where that was all they knew and they didn't know there was any different. And so then they follow in the steps that, they were taught. So I think it doesn't matter how you got started, but I think we should treat it with all the same empathy. But yeah, certainly. I mean, yeah, people having a wisdom tooth surgery and then getting addicted. I mean, that is a story I've heard more than once. I've heard it a lot, and I know that happens often.
Wow. And what would you say? And I know that obviously you worked alongside a lot of the workers at your parents' restaurant. Is there one story for you that just like you wake up maybe thinking about this person or what they went through? But more importantly, I think too, the struggles they endured to get where they are, that they're now employed at your parents' restaurant.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I want to say just in general, I think that addiction is something that is so dark. It is so heavy, and for good reason, because there's a lot of devastation that comes with that. And I certainly include parts of that in my book. However, there is so much joy and so much hope and strength in recovery. And that is something that I've seen in every single employee that I've worked with at DV8, because every single one of them is putting in the work. They want to get sober. And it is a constant everyday fight. It is not just a decision you wake up, say you want to get sober, and then you are. It requires work and perseverance. And I mean, just unimaginable strength. So that hope is something that I've seen time and time again in every single employee. And I think that is, awesome. As far as like the one story that kind of stands out, I would say it's one of the first in my kind of the second part of my book. Is really one of the biggest catalysts for DV8 was this woman who was working at my parents' restaurant before DV8. They had a different one, and she had a son, and she also was struggling with this really terrible addiction. It was a decades-long battle, and she actually was shooting up heroin in our bathroom. And I think that was kind of my parents' realization of like, wow, this really is heavy and this impacts a lot of people. And I, at the time, was in middle school. And so hearing her story and then hearing her open up about that, about what she was going through, watching her, be a mom, try and work, and also struggle with this addiction and trying to get sober, was just something that I think opened my eyes at a pretty young age. And we've been so fortunate to develop this relationship with her over the years. We've seen her through a lot of ups, a lot of downs. But right now she's doing amazing. And I think that's just the coolest kind of example of really living life with this one particular person who really changed my parents' life and changed mine.
And that is what I think is so profound on so many different levels, to have that association with this amazing person who has been through hell and back. And, the turmoil, the emotional toll, the societal type of toll that happens all around with that. And that's kind of, you were kind of at a very young and very impressionable age when that happened.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was definitely at a young age when that happened, but also my journey with recovery and kind of addiction started before that, because while I myself am not in recovery, my dad is. And so I think that was a really interesting part of my growing up that I'm super grateful for. Is my dad is in recovery from alcoholism, and he got sober when my parents were really early on in their marriage. And that was something that I knew growing up. That was never a secret. It was never kind of, taboo. That was something I knew we'd go out to eat and he'd order an O'Doul's, which is a non-alcoholic beer. And while my mom would get a glass of wine. Like, that was just how things were. It was never a secret. It was something I knew. And I'm really thankful for that transparency, because I think one of the biggest issues we have when it comes to talking about addiction and when it comes to the opioid epidemic is people don't want to talk about it. And I get it, because it does seem like this secret that you have to keep. It's something that you sweep under the rug because it's a messy issue. And I understand that. But I do think that by approaching it with honesty and with vulnerability and transparency, that is how we start to understand it. And that's how we can work toward a solution. So my perspective was definitely unique. And I'm really grateful for kind of seeing that that example that my parents set, starting when, since as long as I can remember.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And, the fact that they didn't skirt around the issue or try to hide it. And, kudos to your dad. And there's a story behind that too. Obviously, that your mom and dad, started the DV8 Kitchen. Like, that is so profound. And what a way to share his story by relating with others and gathering others to work at the restaurant. I think that's amazing. Now, I want to ask you, and I just want to start out by saying, in a little sidebar, I want to welcome all of our listeners again on the Wisdom Audio app. We have quite a few on, so thank you so much for being here. The next couple of questions I want to ask, obviously may be sensitive to what is going on in our world today, but we are talking about this to raise awareness of it and have these conversations about the stigma, why there should not be a stigma, and have the transparency to say, you, of course, as a news journalist and reporting on different issues, I want to talk about fentanyl.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's been in the news a lot. And the only association that I have with fentanyl is a very good friend of my son's, who innocently took a fentanyl pill, was unaware from what I understand, and unfortunately died as a result of that. And when my son called me to tell me that, I was bawling my eyes out. I was grieving for his friend who I've met several times, and I just cannot fathom, as a parent, but as a society, of course, all of these drugs coming into the country now. As a news journalist, when you report on something as very sensitive as, we hear the word fentanyl, and some people think politics, or, unfortunately, all that stuff kind of comes into play. As a news journalist, what are your thoughts on everything, your understanding, your personal understanding, but as well as a news journalist, on what we can learn from everything that is transpiring with fentanyl?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I want to say I'm so sorry, to hear that addiction has, affected you and the people that you know and love. Unfortunately, I think that's the case for most of us, if not all of us. But, I'm sorry that happened. And a big issue with that, and kind of the reason we're seeing that, is because of fentanyl. And it is just this kind of new wave of a crisis that we're seeing, I would say. And that's because this drug is so much more potent than the other drugs. So, whether it's heroin or whatever it may be. And so drug dealers are able to mix in small amounts of fentanyl to make their drugs kind of pack more of a punch. And so in their minds, it's this great thing because, they're not spending as much, and they're able to use just this tiny amount of fentanyl. So it's more cost effective for them. But because this is, an illegal drug, it's not regulated. There's no way to know when they're mixing it. There's no sort of like formula they're following. So you could take a pill, or you could shoot up with an IV, and it could have this crazy amount of fentanyl that you don't know is in there, and it's not supposed to be there. So you're taking what you normally take, and unbeknownst to you, all of a sudden, you go into cardiac arrest because you had this trace of a drug mixed in, and just had no idea. So I think there's a lot that comes with that. I think this is it was an issue before the COVID-19 pandemic, but I think that really accelerated it, since drugs, everything was closed. It was harder to get drugs into the US. And so dealers kind of turned to this other solution, and they started producing fentanyl and bringing that in bigger quantities. And so I think that's kind of where a big thing that kind of escalated this issue. But I would say one of the most profound things that I've heard when it comes to the increase in overdoses that we've been seeing, largely related to fentanyl, is I spoke with someone, and I included this in my book, but I spoke with someone from a Never Use Alone hotline. So that basically means it's this hotline that if you are an active drug user and you're about to, partake in using drugs, and you can call this number, it's this hotline and it's anonymous. You give your location and then you just stay on the phone while you're using. And that's because if you are using drugs alone, if you do overdose, there is no one there to save you. And, if you're not with someone, then, you could die very, very easily. And so the person on the other end of the hotline will listen to your breathing, make sure you're good. You'll kind of be talking. And then if something goes wrong, if you were to overdose, then they have your location. So they would send emergency medical services to you. And so kind of a unique concept, but those are becoming more popular. And I spoke with someone from that hotline, or from one of the hotlines, and she was telling me something that kind of shifted my perception on overdoses. Is, we call it overdosing, but that really means you're overtaking your dose. So let's say, you're supposed to take 10 milligrams and you take 20. That is overdosing. You intentionally took too much of the medicine, or in this case, the drug. But a lot of times when fentanyl is in the conversation, you're not doing that. You are taking what you think is the normal amount, what you've used before, but instead you're being poisoned. Because you are unwittingly taking, this drug that you did not intend to take. And so, yes, you were risking something by taking drugs, and I'm not denying that in any way. But I do just think shifting our perspective on overdose, I think, puts the blame kind of on the person who overdosed, as opposed to poisoning. It's like they didn't know what was happening. And so I just think there are little things we can do to kind of shift our mindset when it comes to that. So that was a very long answer, but in short, yes, fentanyl is a huge problem. It's affecting, so many lives. It is literally killing people every single day, and it's absolutely a massive issue.
It sure is. And, my heart goes out to anyone who can hear my voice right now, or if you, of course, listen to the podcast on Amazon Music or iHeartRadio, wherever you listen. Have that conversation with your loved ones, your teenagers, even my adult son, that it just wrecked so many lives. And I thought about that after I had this, he told me what had happened. And I thought about the ripple effect of that bright young lady and how her death is really, just affected so many people.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And because these are real people, real lives. It could be, it could be your mother, your father, your son, your daughter, your neighbor, your college professor. It could be you. And anytime someone overdoses, that's not just affecting them, it's affecting everyone in their lives around them. And so I think a lot of times people kind of, when they hear addiction, because it is becoming a bigger conversation nowadays as the opioid epidemic gets worse, I do think people kind of write it off sometimes, like, oh, I don't know any drug addicts, and kind of have that mentality. But it's like, honestly, you probably do. And if you don't know anyone now who's struggling, then you probably will in the future. And that sounds so doom and gloom. And it is. It's awful. And I hate to say that, but it's true. And the only way we're going to get better is if we start to really talk about it and have those conversations.
And that's, I think, the real important key there is to have those open and honest conversations. And, as you said, as you wrote in that chapter, addiction doesn't discriminate. It doesn't discriminate anyone from any, so as you said, socioeconomic background, gender, race, whatever it may be. That addiction doesn't care.
It doesn't care at all. And I think that is something that we need to understand. And I think the reason there is this stigma is because it's something that carries such shame because we don't talk about it. But I think when people choose to enter recovery, when they want to get sober, something they realize is, there are people out there that are just like me, and they also share the same struggle. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that, because I think that can be, I think people, when they are struggling, they feel so bad about themselves. They think there's something wrong with them. But really, there are so many people struggling, and it is not some, defect or character flaw. It is a real issue. It is a real disease. It is something real that people are struggling with. And I think there is such a beauty in the community that comes from people in recovery because they're able to share those experiences without the shame and without that stigma. And I just wish that was a larger conversation that people even outside of the recovery community could kind of join in on, because there is so much beauty in that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think of all those amazing people that have worked at your parents' restaurant, that their stories, from addiction to working through it. And as you said, addiction never goes away. It's something that they have to work on each day, but there's stories of triumph over tragedy. There's
Yeah.
stories of survival. There's stories like the rock bottom stories. Those stories need to be heard in order for people to maybe perhaps have a better understanding. And one thing also that you had pointed out is, probably everyone knows someone who obviously has been affected by it. But I've also heard, and this was a couple of weeks ago, of closet addiction. And I thought to myself, my gosh, I never heard of that term, closet addiction. So we may know somebody, but may not know ourselves that they are struggling.
Absolutely. And again, I think that goes back to the shame in it because, people feel bad. If you find yourself uncontrollably taking more of your prescription pills, or you transition to a different drug that's cheaper because you run out of money and you can't afford it. I mean, there is this deep shame. And so you want to hide it. I mean, I don't think, while I wish it were the case that people would find themselves struggling and instantly turn to friends and family to help them, that is not always the case. More often, that's not the case because you feel this shame, and so you try and hide it. And that's for people that have a great support system. But so many people also who are struggling with substance use disorder don't have that support system. And that might be a reason that they turn to drugs, is they don't have anyone around them who can help them. They don't have any other example to follow, and they don't know what to do. And this is, it's kind of their circumstances and the position that they find themselves in. And they don't have someone that can encourage them to get sober, that can encourage them to go through recovery. So there are so many different ways that addiction can kind of present, but I think through all of it, that desire to kind of hide it and to not talk about it is really clear, I think, in everyone. And that is something that I think changes when people go through recovery. And what is the coolest thing to see is once people make the decision to get sober, they fight that everyday fight and they're in this community. They want to share their stories. They want to help other people. They want to talk about their experiences. And, that was really cool in writing my book and in talking to them, is people are so open. And I think that's because they realize the value of it. And that is polar opposite of how most people feel when they're in active addiction.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And as you also had mentioned before too, a lot of people don't have that example to follow, and that's what they know. Now, can you recall maybe perhaps a certain conversation or story that someone has shared with you from a family type of situation, perhaps where maybe the parent and then the grandparents, and it's been traveled down from generation to generation? What was one important thing perhaps that you took away from their story?
Yeah. I mean, I would just say the importance of the examples that are set for you, because I am so fortunate. So many of my friends are so fortunate to have grown up in a loving household where we were treated well, we were raised right. We didn't have a lot of, trauma that we grew up with, but we had parents and grandparents and family members that really set us up for success. We had teachers that poured into us. We had mentors to follow, and we had a path that we were, kind of set on. And I am so fortunate for that. And that is simply not the case for others. And what I think the biggest takeaway is, if you don't have anyone in your life, anyone at all, who is setting a good example, how are you supposed to do better? if that is all you know, and this is a real, I mean, experience that people have, they're pulled out of school at maybe third grade. So they're not going to school. They live at home. They don't have an education. And all they have is, parents or grandparents or family members who are in active drug addiction. So you're in third grade. You're what, 9 years old? That's the example. That's what you have. You don't go to school. You probably don't have many friends. And so this is the life that you see. And this is all you know is out there. And so I think that is just so poignant, is like, how are they supposed to know any different? How are they supposed to do better? And that is a very real story. And I've seen that time and time again with employees at DV8 and outside of DV8. And it's heartbreaking to know that that reality exists for a lot of people. And it's not one that I think a lot of us see often, but it is very real, and it is not the exception. That happens often, which is, so sad.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Has there been one common denominator with these stories that you always look at and say, wow, I see that in all these stories, like something that pops out to you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Off the top of my head, it would be kind of what I talked about earlier, which is just strength. I mean, just a true desire to do better, and just the strength that comes from that. And that was something that I was blown away with every single person that told me their story, whether it was someone who had struggled themselves or someone who had watched a loved one struggle, is just their strength in rehashing, some of the worst moments of their life. And not only sitting down and talking with me about that, but then having the strength to let me share that with, the world in the form of a book. I mean, that takes some guts, and that is something that I admire so much. And as I mentioned, that is something I think in the recovery community, that vulnerability is pretty clear with almost everyone in recovery, everyone at least that I've met. And so that is kind of the common denominator. And I think that shows real kind of change in a person, is that strength, the vulnerability, the humility to be able to say, I was struggling. This was my rock bottom, and this is what it looked like, but look at where I'm at now, and look how I've kind of rose from the ashes of that. So, I mean, that is just, it's inspiring to me, is just seeing that in everyone.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't agree more with you. Where do you see deviate from denial going? In other words, I picture you, quite frankly, on a TEDx stage, just saying.
Well, thank you. I would love that opportunity. I really just think any opportunity I can get to share the message is what I'd like to do. So I think I have a unique perspective for sure when it comes to just my growing up and what I've seen and who I've met. I'm not a subject matter expert, but I do think that I have this unique experience. And so I just like to be able to share that. And I'd like to be able to help people start the conversation. So whether that's on a TEDx stage or, podcasts like this, I just want to be able to talk about deviate from denial, the message behind it, and why it's important for people to know about that. And just get that conversation going, wherever or however that may be.
And that's so important, wherever or however it may be. Oh my gosh, this is such an amazing conversation. Just want to segue again and welcome all of our listeners currently on the Wisdom Audio app. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the love. I see some hearts coming up. We so appreciate that. And Sam, do you have a couple minutes? I would like to invite maybe one of our guests to come up on stage if they have a question for you, or maybe they want to share their experience, or just, join in the conversation.
Oh my goodness, absolutely.
All right, Wisdom listeners, would love for one of you to come up. We do have time for one guest to come up, so we'll give that just a couple of minutes. Sam, do you have any, along with your book, of course, what else do you want to do with your book? In other words, do you foresee a second book? Do you foresee maybe a masterclass?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say right now I'm trying to kind of enjoy the process of having this book finally out into the world. So I'm kind of just trying to enjoy that, share the word about it. But, never say never. I really enjoyed the book writing process. And one thing I noticed when I was writing this is there are not enough pages in the world to write all I have to say on addiction, all there is that goes into
Right.
it. There's so much. And so I certainly think there's potential for another book, either that I would write or my parents. I shared a little bit of their story in my book, but there's a lot to share. So I could see support.
Wow. Oh my God, that is amazing. And we do have a guest, and Dr. Robert James. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Stories That Inspire Us, the author series. You are on live with us, along with obviously our amazing guest, Sam Perez. Welcome.
Thank you. Once it came out, I was invited, and I was one of the beta testers, and just the inspirement from these people, just going forward and creating the goal they set, and not only creating it, they going forward and having the goal, and I ended up writing a book from this out being out, and the name of it is Unaware of Your Awareness.
Oh, that's very
Yeah.
unique. Unaware of your awareness.
That is.
Thank you. And it's about me, and how I got over dyslexic, and not necessarily got over it, but overcame the doubt and the fear of me not succeeding.
Hmm.
And and just me. Let's see. I was in the 5th grade, and the teacher asked us to memorize the 50 states and learn to spell them. She asked me to go to the board and spell Mississippi. I could not spell that word forward, but what I did is walk to the other side of the blackboard and spelled the word backwards. She said, "James, you are dyslexic, and that is unique." So when I got
Wow.
in 6th grade, my teacher said, "You have a special talent. Don't ever stop using it."
Oh,
And
that is awesome.
Yeah.
thank you.
And Dr. James, before I forget to ask you, when is your book coming out, or is it already out?
It's coming out. I said before my birthday is December 21st.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, it's coming out soon. I keep saying, let's go ahead and do it, and the wife said, let's make sure all the I's and T's is crossed, and
Mm-hmm.
so like that. So, and I was listening to it yesterday, and thought up a few things that I can put in there, and stuff like that, and last month I ended up thought I was done,
Mm-hmm.
but the 10th chapter, I ended up writing 2 more chapters.
Whoa.
That's
Sam,
awesome.
did that happen with you when you were writing your book? Like, no more. I got to put this chapter in.
Definitely. Oh my goodness. That happened often where I was like, okay, so I'm going to start with this small idea. Like the book totally expanded. It covered so much more than I expected it to.
Wow. It was that, and that sounds like it was the same for you, Dr. James.
Yes, and just listen to Sam today. Now, I was thinking about different things, and even me and my cousin, working out in the cotton field and picking cotton and beans and stuff, and it just came to mind. Besides learning to drive a tractor at the age of 10,
Whoa.
and I'm planning a 2-mile by 2-mile field. So even though it was my uncle tractor and it was on his farm, he had 5 acres, but he taught me to do that.
Wow.
So,
that is amazing. And I know that your time is going to run out in just a moment. And I just want to say to you, we need to get you on the Stories That Inspire Us, the author series. So send me a message, click on my profile, and that will bring, and Dr. James, I know that you signed off, but that will bring you to my Truly Your VA website, and you can send me a contact form through there. So don't forget to do that. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for him, Sam. I mean,
I know, that's awesome.
I love the title of that book, Unaware of Your Awareness.
Very cool.
Wow, this has been such an amazing conversation. I really could talk with hours with you. And I'm so excited that your book is out. Your book really is so relatable to so many people that are suffering, and perhaps to the families, that they can gather some information that maybe, be inspired by all of these different stories. Sam, before I forget to ask you, where can our viewers and listeners get in contact with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter as @SamPerezNews. And then my website is sam-perez.com.
Wonderful. And of course, I will make sure that all of your information is in the show notes. Boy, I'm stumbling over my words today.
No, you're good. A lot of talking.
I'll take another sip in just a moment. Sam, your book really touches upon so many things, as we've discussed, that we have yet to discuss so much more. But really, Deviate from Denial is, I think, a segue to starting that conversation. And so much goodness in your book, so much knowledge. And I just can't thank you enough for being on. And I hope that you will definitely consider coming back to visit us.
Oh my gosh, absolutely, Janice. This has been such an awesome conversation, and I'm so grateful to have been on it. So thank you just so much for, sharing my story and sharing the story of other authors. I think this is really cool.
Well, thank you so much. It was my pleasure to have you on. And I just want to say, before we do the sign off on wisdom, some things that we talked about could be sensitive in nature, and we realize that, but it was done with heartful intent to start the conversation, because these are the stories that need to be told, that hopefully inspire others. I want to thank all of my listeners on the Wisdom audio app. And I want to thank Dr. Robert James Goodman for coming up and having a conversation with Sam and I. And remember, if you have a story to share, it's that important. It means somebody else needs to hear your story. Don't keep it inside. It needs to be told. You feel free to go to my website, as I explained to Dr. James, and you can send me a contact form through there, and let's have that conversation. Again, thank you, Wisdom. And my name is Janice, the host of Stories That Inspire Us. And we shall see you again real soon. Bye for now. Hey, everyone. Oh my gosh, amazing podcast today. I could chit chat forever. No doubt about that, right? Really, I want to just stress again that everybody has a story within them. And what better way to share your experience, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, that inspired you to take action in your own lives. My name is Janice Malillo, the host of Stories That Inspire Us / the author series. Today, I was truly inspired by this amazing young lady, Sam Perez. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you again, Sam. And remember, your story is important and you matter. Thank you, and bye for now.